A woman flees from her abusive husband and goes to a church where she is promised a better life for her and for her daughter. But once there, she discovered shocking things about this church and Pastor Adonijah that makes her believe that she made a terrible mistake. Once you enter this church compound, you are not allowed to leave. Amani discovers the shocking truth about the 1,000 women pregnant with Pastor Adonijah's so-called holy seed. She stumbles upon secrets. Women vanishes, children disappear, and the truth is buried deeper than anyone dares to dig. Will Amani find a way out before it is too late, or will she become just another forgotten victim of a terrifying cat? Join us in this as you find out. Amani stood at the bus stop, clutching her daughter Waridi's hand tightly. The noisy bustle of the city felt like a wall closing in on her, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating fear she had escaped from. Just days before, she had fled from her abusive husband, leaving everything behind. She didn't know where to go, only that she had to protect her daughter. Tears welled up in Amani's eyes as she glanced down at Waridi, whose small face looked tired and confused. The child didn't understand why they were running, why they had left home in such a hurry. Amani didn't have the strength to explain, and right now, she didn't even have a plan. As she stood there, unsure of her next move, two women dressed in fine clothes approached her. They seemed out of place at the dusty bus stop, their clean, polished appearances contrasting with the chaos around them. They smiled warmly at her. "Hello, sister," one of them said in a soft voice. "You look like you need help." Amani hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers being kind to her, especially after all she had been through. But the women's smile seemed genuine, and their words offered a glimmer of hope in her dark situation. "We are from Pastor Adonijah's church," the second woman explained. "It's a wonderful place. People come to us when they need a fresh start, and we help them rebuild their lives." Amani's heart lifted. A fresh start? That's exactly what she needed. She was tired of living in fear, tired of running. The thought of a place where she and Warida could finally be safe was too tempting to resist. I don't know," Amani stammered. "I don't have any money." The women smiled again, even wider this time. "Money doesn't matter. Pastor Adonijah helps everyone, no matter their situation. You'll be taken care of." Warida tugged on her mother's sleeve, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Mama, are we going to a new home?" Amani swallowed hard, her mind racing. She wanted to believe those women. She wanted to believe there was a place where she and her daughter could start over. Maybe this church was the answer to her prayers. After all, what did she have to lose? Without giving herself more time to think, Amani nodded slowly. "Okay, I will follow you guys." The women exchanged a satisfied glance and beckoned Amani to follow them. As she held Warida's hands and walked with the strangers, Amani couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Something about this felt too good to be true, but she pushed the thought away. She needed hope, and this church seemed to offer just that. As they headed towards a car parked nearby, Amani felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Little did she know the decision she had just made would lead her into a nightmare far worse than anything she had ever imagined. The car ride to the church was quiet, except for the occasional hum of the engine and the rhythmic tap of Warida's fingers against the window. Amani glanced out, watching the busy streets of the city turned into quieter, more desolate roads. The building they passed seemed older, more run down, and the further they drove, the fewer people they were. Amani's nerves started to return. "Is the church far from the city?" she asked, trying to sound casual. One of the women turned to her with a reassuring smile. "It's a bit outside the city, but that's good, isn't it? Peace and quiet. You'll be able to relax there." Amani forced a smile, but inside her doubts were growing. She held Warida closer, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to ask. Finally, they arrived at the church compound. High walls surrounded the place, and Amani noticed a large iron gate as they drove through. Guards were stationed at the entrance, their faces stained and watchful. Amani's stomach churned. Why would the church need so much security? The car stopped in front of a grand building, far too luxurious for what she imagined a church to be. It looked more like a mansion, with polished marble steps leading up to the entrance and large windows that reflected the setting sun. The women stepped out, gesturing for Amani and Warida to follow. Amani's leg felt heavy as she climbed out of the car, gripping her daughter's hand tighter. Something didn't feel right. They were ushered into a large hall, where several other women stood, all dressed in plain, modest clothing. Amani noticed the vacant expression on their faces, and her heart pounded. She turned to the women who had brought her in, but before she could ask any questions, a deep, commanding voice echoed through the wall. "Welcome." Amani turned to see a tall man walking towards them, his eyes sharp and penetrating. His presence filled the room, and the women immediately bowed their heads in respect. The man was Pastor Adonijah. "Welcome to my church," he said, his voice smooth and calming. "You have made the right choice by coming here. You will find peace and purpose in this place." Amani wanted to believe him. His words were soothing, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. But then, she caught sight of the guards standing near the door, their eyes fixed on her. The uneasy feeling returned, stronger this time. Waridi tugged on her hand. "Mama, I am scared," she whispered. Amani knelt down, forcing a smile for her daughter's sake. "It's okay, baby," she whispered back. "Everything will be okay." But deep down, Amani wasn't sure anymore. Amani's nerves were on edge as Pastor Adonijah continued to speak. His voice was deep, almost hypnotic. As he welcomed the newcomers to his church, he moved gracefully, his robes swishing lightly with each step, and everyone seemed to hang on to his every word. "The world outside is filled with chaos," he said, "but here you will find peace. You'll be provided with everything you need: a home, food, and a sense of purpose. All we ask is that you follow our rules. These rules are designed to keep you safe and spiritually pure." Amani felt a chill creep up her spine at the mention of rules. She glanced around the room at the other women, their eyes still downcast, their faces expressionless. No one seemed to question him, not even the women who had brought her here. Pastor Adonijah continued, "First, no one leaves this compound without my permission. Once you are here, this is your home, and it's important that you remain under the protection of our church. Second, there is no communication with the outside world. Your old life is behind you now, and you must focus on the spiritual path ahead. Third, You must obey me and the leaders I have appointed without question." Amani's heart raced. No one leaves, no communication with the outside world. This didn't sound like any church he had ever heard of. She glanced down at Waridi, who was fidgeting nervously beside her, and felt an overwhelming urge to run. But where would she go? The guards at the gates had made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. "We will take care of you," Pastor Adonijah said, his voice growing softer. "You will want for nothing as long as you remain obedient. If you follow these rules, you will live a blessed life." Amani felt trapped. She didn't know if she could trust Pastor Adonijah, but she also didn't have anywhere else to go. She had no money, no home, and she couldn't go back to her abusive husband. For now, she decided she would play along. She needed time to figure out a way out of this place, but her instincts told her that she and Waridi were in grave danger. The women who had brought her here led Amani and Waridi to a small room at the back of the building. It was bare except for 2 beds, a small table, and a single window that was barred shut. Amani swallowed hard as the door closed behind them. Waridi sat on one of the beds, her small face full of confusion. "Mama, is this our new home?" Amani forced a smile, trying to keep her fear at bay. "For now, baby, just for now." But deep down, she knew this was no home. This was a prison. That night, Amani barely slept. Her mind was racing with fear and doubt, and every sound in the compound made her jump. Waridi had fallen asleep beside her, clutching her arm tightly, as if she could sense her mother's fear. At night, the sound of a loud bell echoed through the compound, startling Amani awake. She sat up, her heart pounding, as the door to her room suddenly swung open. One of the women from earlier stood in the doorway. "It's time for the night vigil," she said flatly. "Everyone must attend." Amani glanced at Waridi, still asleep, and shook her head. "But my daughter, she's too young." The woman's eyes narrowed. "No exceptions. Pastor Adonijah insists everyone attend. Leave the child here." Amani's stomach churned with dread, but she had no choice. She gently laid Waridi back on the bed, kissed her forehead, and followed the woman out of the room. The vigil was held in a large hall, the same place where they had met Pastor Adonijah earlier. The lights were dim, and candles lined the walls, casting airy shadows across the room. Amani noticed that the other women all wore black expression, their faces dull and lifeless. It was as if they were in some kind of trance. Pastor Adonijah stood at the front of the room, his arms raised as he led the group in prayer. His voice was low and commanding, and women chanting after him, their voices blending into a haunting hymn. Amani felt a wave of unease wash over her. Something was very wrong here. As the night wore on, Pastor Adonijah's prayers became more intense, more frenzied. The women around Amani began to sway and chant louder, their eyes wide and vacant. Amani's heart raced as she watched them. It felt as if she were witnessing some kind of ritual, not a prayer service. Suddenly, Pastor Adonijah's voice boomed through the wall. "We must cleanse ourselves of the sins of the outside world," he shouted. "Only then can we truly be free." The women around Amani began to wail, falling to their knees as they begged for forgiveness. Amani stood frozen, her mind reeling. What kind of place is this? Before she could react, one of the guards grabbed her arms and dragged her to the front of the door. "Kneel," he ordered. Amani's knee buckled beneath her, and she knelt on the cold floor. She could feel Pastor Adonijah's eyes on her, and she dared not look up. "You must be cleansed," he said, his voice a dangerous whisper. Tears filled Amani's eyes as fear gripped her. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she had to find a way out of this nightmare. The next morning, Amani woke to the sound of Waridi's voice calling her. She blinked her eyes open and found her daughter standing beside the bed, her face full of concern. "Mama, are you okay?" Warida asked. Amani sat up slowly, her body aching from the night before. She had no idea how she had gotten back to her room. The night vigil felt like a terrible blow, and the fear that had settled in her bones was still there. "I'm fine, baby," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. As she got out of bed, Amani knew she couldn't stay here much longer. Something was deeply wrong with this church, and she needed to protect her daughter. But with the guards watching the gates and Pastor Adonijah's strict rules, escaping seemed impossible. Later that day, as Amani wandered around the compound, she overheard a conversation between two of the other women. They spoke in harsh voices, glancing nervously around to make sure no one was listening. "They are taking people again tonight," one of the women whispered. "I heard it's happening during the next vigil." Amani's heart skipped a beat. "Taking people? What did this mean?" She inched closer to hear more, her mind racing. "Once they take you," the woman said, "you never come back. No one knows where they go." Amani's blood ran cold. She needed to get out of here, fast. But how? The revelation Amani overheard haunted her thoughts all day. She needed to leave, but the compound was like a fortress, with guards patrolling every exit. She couldn't risk Waridi's safety, but she knew staying longer would only put them both in more danger. She kept glancing over at her daughter, who played quietly in their room, blissfully unaware of the horror around them. As night approached, Amani's heart raced. She had to make her move before the next vigil. She couldn't wait to find out what happened to the other women who disappeared. She devised a plan. During the evening prayer, while everyone's attention was on Pastor Adonijah, she would sneak out. She noticed earlier that one of the back doors leading out to the courtyard was often left unguarded during prayer sessions. It was a slim chance, but it was the only one she had. When the time came for the evening prayer, Amani held Waridi's hand tightly as they joined the congregation in the large hall. Pastor Adonijah was already leading the chant, his voice echoing ominously through the dimly lit room. The guards were positioned near the front, and no one seemed to be paying attention to the back of the hall. Amani whispered to Waridi, "Stay close to me and don't make a sound." Waridi nodded, her wide eyes showing she trusted her mother completely. Amani's heart ached with fear, but she had to stay strong. Slowly, as the prayers grew louder, Amani began to inch towards the back of the room, pulling Waridi gently along with her. Her eyes darted around the room, making sure none of the guards were watching. She reached the back door, her hand trembling as she grabbed the handle. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out from the front. "Where are you going?" Amani froze. Her heart stopped as she turned to see one of the guards glaring at her. The entire room had gone silent, all eyes now fixed on her and Waridi. I was just..." Amani stammered, trying to think of an excuse. Tell us where you are watching from, because it will help us to know when to post another story. And if you like this story, write escape on the comment section.